All right, thank you so much for bearing with us while we're getting some tech stuff done. Thanks for coming to the first opening of this semester. If you guys don't know me already, my name is Molly. I'm taking over for Anza, who big congrats to them. They got a promotion, so I'm so happy to be back. Yes, claps for Anza. I'm so happy to be back at SNC. I was on my 2014 BFA in ceramics and genres. There, I did a MFA in ceramics at Wesleyan University, and then I got a resident at the Dance Center for the Arts. And then I just finished up a residency at Pottery Northwest in Seattle. And I'm just so happy to be back here and to be the new gallery director. Thank you. So before I introduce Kristin, I just want to go through the happenings of the gallery this semester. So after Kristin's show, we have Hassler Gomez in the Garage Door Gallery. That opening is going to be October 13th. That will happen on the second floor. His talk will happen on the second floor of Pullman. So please join us for that as well. And then after that is BFA season. So we have a lot of BFAs. As most of you know, there are 6 of them. And first up, we have Courtney Rao and Lauren Murphy, and their reception. Yes, thank you, Lauren Murphy right there. Their reception will be on November 3rd at 5 p.m. in the same place. We Courtney's the Garage Door Gallery, and Lauren is in this gallery. And then after that, we've got Julia Hart and Victor Herrera. Their reception will be November 10th. And then the last one will be Nikki Sardelli and Gabe Seaback, and their reception will be November 17th. So just keep those dates in mind and keep coming back. We've got a whole team ready for you. So now that we've updated you on the schedule, I'm so excited to have Kristin Hough here. Kristin's, last name. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. It's right straight from. Kristin is an artist, educator, and curator. She's newly based in Nevada in Reno. Her BA is from Wesleyan University, her MFA is from UC Davis. She's exhibited nationally, and her work has been featured in New American Paintings and Hyperallergic. She's been an artist in residence at the Vermont Studio Center and co-founded an artist-run project space called the Outback Art House. And currently, Kristin is teaching drawing and design at UNLV and UNR. So join me in welcoming Kristin. Thank you.
Thank you, Molly. Thanks everyone for having me here. I'm just going to quickly talk about the work that's in the gallery now, and then talk about some of the projects I've done since. So a lot of my work, and especially leading up to this work, has been sort of looking at places or natural sites where the man-made and the natural kind of mash up together, and thinking about these places as tourist destinations and sort of leisure theory and how we spend time and get fulfillment, basically in a very broad sense. So these are the paintings in the show right now, and most all of the imagery is pulled from TripAdvisor and Yelp. I've always been interested in sort of pulling both from my own experiences and my own photography and mixing that with imagery pulled from the internet and really thinking about how digital technologies have sort of shaped the way we travel and see places. So that's where part of the interest in the Yelp TripAdvisor stuff comes in. I also pulled a lot from the Blue Lagoon's website, so I don't know if I mentioned this. All of the paintings are based on imagery from the Blue Lagoon in Iceland, and thinking and playing with the landscape as this place of wonder, of the sublime, but also a place of sort of self-care, self-help, and how all of these sort of capitalistic pursuits match up with people going to natural places. So trying to find the humor in some of this, and also the awe mixed with it. Definitely a lot of the work I do, like things I'm thinking about, whether it be TV or sort of like ecotourism. They're places, they're things that I'm interested in because I am also interested in going to that or being a participant in that, and so sort of like battling with the guilt of some of that and sort of my own mixed feelings about these places or things. So with these, really playing with super painterly marks, bright borders, I've always been interested in different framing devices and sort of, thinking about photography and drinking and bathing and self-care and all this different stuff that happens at these natural sites. I started to sort of introducing self-portraits in this work. This was in one of the last ones. I thought it might be nice to pull some of the imagery that I was painting from at the time off my computer. And so part of what I really liked about painting from the Blue Lagoon is the place itself feels so painterly to me already. The mist, the really interesting and limited color palette. And then also, it's just this place that you get bathing and drinking and sort of socializing. So there's these very like vulnerable, intimate things going on, and also very public acts mixed in with this beautiful, somewhat natural site. So there's just a lot of things there that I found really interesting. And the imagery that you see people uploading of their time there sort of oscillates between party shots and putting masks on, and sort of it butts up against like beauty culture, but also these people just seeming like absolutely blissed out. And so the range of emotions at some of these sites, and then the urge to publicize all of that was something that kind of drove me to make these paintings. Just shots like this I find so beautiful, sort of the like veiled nature of all the steam coming off the water, and it just, like I said, feels like a painting already, and it just felt like it was sort of screaming to be painted. So playing with, reflections and what happens when we're in water, and sort of trying to translate some of those physical experiences to paint, and also thinking about putting on the mask, how that also applies to painting and representation. How everyone would walk around with these white mud masks that people who ran the lagoon like walk around with bowls of the mask and just kind of like slop it in your hands. And it's very sort of funny, but kind of felt ritualistic in a way. There's just a lot of stuff there that felt really interesting, and white paint feels very similar to the white mask. So kind of playing with all of that. And again, pulling text right from these review sites. And this is another self-portrait that I sort of started putting in these, and I've done a few of this specific figure who I call Lagoon. Again, just thinking about my own participation in all of these things and sort of playing around with like joy, humor, and cynicism associated with these places. So that kind of led me very directly to making work, still dealing with nature, thinking about self-help and about, souvenirs, which are such a part of tourism, taking something home with you and sort of broadcasting your trip, thinking about the cultural capital that you get from going to certain places. So after that work, I was making these, I call them self-improvement towels. They have text from Tony Robbins on them, and the imagery is all waterfalls. They're pretty funny. They have very admittedly bad graphic design. And I was sort of intentional thinking about the way that we package these messages and pair them with these natural sites. So I did a bunch of these, and at the same time, or right before, I was also making towels. Again, related to bathing and something that you take to the beach. And again, using nature iconography, but then also painting from religious pamphlets that I would pick up off the street. I was living in LA at the time, and it was just something that I started finding all the time, every time I would walk. And so I had this huge pile of them. And there was just something about the graphic design I found very both humorous and sinister and just really interesting. So I started making these towels that had iconography on them, a lot of very childlike iconography, a lot of humorous questions and sort of like caricatures. So this sort of spurred me to really incorporating like mass-produced goods into my work, or having some painted element, but then another element that could be, you know, part of the thing I'm talking about, part of the souvenir culture, like take something home with you and display it. So still thinking about self-help and religion and nature, how they all kind of blend together, kind of leads you to thinking about paradises and utopias, but then not always have this image or interest in television and how media shapes our relationship with the landscape. So from there, I started making this series of work that is screen caps from Bachelor in Paradise, which is the spin-off show of The Bachelor. And so really thinking about how the show and TV in general sort of broadcasts this idea of paradise, or what a tropical utopia looks like. And again, playing with framing devices and storyboards. I've always been really influenced by comics, and so I think reading comics as a kid a lot has sort of shaped my love of the grid and having images in multiples. So this is from a few seasons of Bachelor in Paradise, and I was just pulling moments that I thought were like tropes in the show. One of which being these very funny zoom-ins of animals, and this will kind of influence another body of work down the line. And they really use these shots of animals that look very like nature documentarian to kind of set the tone of the show. I mean, it's a very ridiculous show. These are shows that when I was in grad school, I would like hide in my studio to watch, and it was very embarrassing to tell people that I watched. And so instead of, sort of like how I was talking earlier, like taking the things that I'm guilty in participating in, and trying to think about why they interest me, why it is a guilty pleasure. And I think it just really ties into a lot of these different themes that I keep going back to. So these shots of emerging through the jungle, sort of the way they frame people, again, drinking and working out and self-care, and sort of linking all of these things together to put out this idea of, you know, a paradise or a utopia. And this really started my work in TV. And TV has always been something I've been really interested in, and artists who make work about TV have always found really interesting, but I think I was, especially in grad school, kind of scared to take that leap, or felt like I said embarrassed about it a little bit. And then once I sort of broke the seal with this body of work, it influenced a lot of future pieces. Just playing around with very slowly watching Bachelor in Paradise, and taking hundreds of caps and finding these moments that felt like they were either happening over and over, or that would just strike me visually to me for some reason, and being really proud. So from there, thinking about Bachelor in Paradise, it led me to think about Survivor, and I think all of the Survivor work that's coming up next felt really important at the time with some of the text work because of like the headline nature society today. And a lot of the text that I'm pulling, I titled it Microcosmic Thoughts because it feels like the shows were trying to put forth this like tiny universe and have all the drama unfold. And so this paintings that came from Survivor, it's all from the first season in 2001. And again, I think it's interesting as things get more and more technological and we are less reliant on these survival skills. There's still this deep fascination with the shows. And so some of the paintings are from Survivor and some of them are from this other show that I don't think anyone watched. One really great, just for good measure. But the other show was called Castaway. I don't know if you can't remember the show itself. But they use all of this text that again felt very tied to self-help, to religion. This painting, when I made it, my mom was very concerned that I was having some emotional trauma. So, no, just from Castaway. So again, playing with the language and how it's paired with these visuals of natural places has been a big part of the work. These are just some closed captioning paintings from Survivor. And then again, like the text from them felt very tied to both the self-help or religious way of writing, but then also felt very much tied to how we read the news and how we take in just so much these days. And so I was taking a lot of imagery from the promotional videos where it's just like clip after clip after clip. And that's sort of why I was playing with this one, having so many panels, because when you're watching it, you're seeing each frame for like 1 second. And so I thought it was interesting to take something that when you view it as part of a promotional video, you see the whole thing in like 3 seconds with the painting. It becomes something very slow in some ways. I think anything you take the time to paint sort of becomes influential in a way, but then also it's still, it's still an image and you're seeing someone's hand representing it. So sort of playing around with that duality is interesting to me. And then, yeah, this is the last one from that series, just sort of these foreboding words. And again, thinking about like these shots of the landscape and how the text is influencing them. From there, still thinking about trinkets and souvenirs, and I previously painted men holding fish and thinking about how fish become this sort of trophy and the symbol of dominance over the landscape, and I've always found that sort of showing off or prize aspect of fishing to be sort of bizarre and interesting, and then sort of tied it with the mass-produced trinket again, although these are all hand-painted, so they're really not mass-produced at all. But I think the way that it hangs on the nails, the keychain kind of feels like a fish on a hook. Interesting. And then thinking, going back to all the Bachelor in Paradise work and the Survivor work, it felt very much like they were talking about gender roles in relationship to how we act in the landscape and how you're supposed to act. And so that sort of led me down this path of thinking about nature iconography and how it tends to be tied to gender. And so I did this whole series of butterflies and fish and sort of playing around with these paintings. Butterflies tend to be associated with things very like girly and all of that. So trying to push against that, but still playing with the border, the frame, and kind of referencing nature documentary shots and old TVs, the old kind of bubble TVs here. So this sort of started some work really thinking more about gender and how it pertains to all of this iconography. I don't know if it's, my implicit bias in these, but I ended up really loving the fish paintings and really keeping on board. Trevor just kind of beautiful looking, right? So then playing again with framing and sort of different viewpoints. This one was fun to paint. And again, thinking about the trophy and sort of its dominance over nature. And then I did another self-portrait. This one was influenced by this Joan Brown self-portrait, which is titled Self-Portrait with Fish and a Cat. And so, you know, a lot of her self-portraits were very much about her as an artist in the studio, often like paint all over her and reclaiming the fish or the trophy in my mind. So I changed it out. So the cat and put my dog, Marshall, the greyhound, in there. Just starting to really play around with self-portraits and how they can sort of have power as symbols a little bit. There's one more I'll show later on. And then again, taking some of the survivor language, outwit, outlast, outplay, and just sort of tying that back with this idea of like how do you survive, how do you conquer, and what is mainstream media in the town. This work with reality TV felt more important, of course, with the last election, having a president who was born of reality TV and sort of thinking about how these things that can feel kind of frivolous can actually start to infiltrate everything. And so I ended up going back to the Bachelor and doing all of these paintings that were screenshots of women crying on the Bachelor. And this sort of felt like the most ubiquitous thing on the show. You just couldn't get away from these shots of women crying. I read this really interesting essay that talked about comparing the shot of women crying in reality TV to the money shot in porn, and just having the biggest moment when you're getting a physical response, something that is telling the viewer like this is real, this is often authentic, but sort of at what cost? And just thinking about the portrayal of women and again using the text to sort of play around with these representations. Some of them feel very tied to art historical references too. Definitely all of the ones of this specific contestant felt very Wittgenstein to me. These, close-ups of the tears, and so it felt like something important for me to investigate at the time, how this work and the television show that again I watch and I feel like guilty in watching, felt like it was something that I had to sort of investigate more. The show is, these paintings in some ways are very horrific. The show is, pretty terrible in terms of their gender, in terms of race. There's all these horrible things that go along with it. And so, part of making this work, I feel like it's me wondering, like, is this powerful to put it out there to make note of it, or is it sort of me doing the same thing the show is doing? So definitely it's work that I question, but ultimately it feels, I feel like it's very critical of the show, and so it felt important to make them. I painted so many women crying, I'm about ready to take a break from this. But I was playing with, they were installed with a red curtain, and so thinking about the theatricality of it. Again, just the amount of them using sort of the grid or this tight line of women crying is sort of supposed to simulate the promotional video or even just the show itself where they cut back and forth so constantly of women in tears. So I also did a book on The Bachelor, and this was sort of a more earnest attempt to find moments in the show that to me did feel very like earnest or real. So I did portraits of all the contestants from 2 seasons, and the text, it's probably hard to read here, is what they said when they were kicked off the show or broken up with, and playing again with language. And once that stuff is written down, it's so tragic. It felt very it did feel real in a sense, someone just saying like, I don't deserve this, like I'll never find love, or they feel really heartbreaking. So playing around with what happens when you take something that's spoken and put it in book form, I think that could be very intimate, but still playing with multiples. That was a lot of what was going on with the book. Sorry, a lot of work here. So that's sort of the end of the reality TV and paintings. And then I thought, since we are in beautiful Tahoe, where the landscape is so important, I would talk about the land art stuff I do real quick. So me and my collaborator, big sponsor, set out to make some earthworks. I guess 2 years ago now, but it really feels tied into all the other work we did. So we made a few pieces up in Duns near California, which is right near Mount Shasta. And a lot of this work too was propelled by a lot of the things that are important in my needs. Who has access to certain things, who can make work, land art typically very male dominated, only for the extremely wealthy. And so, living near double negative, I was in Vegas, there's so much land art feels like I'm gonna get something and dig a big hole with a machine. So we instead tried to dig a hole with our hands and just shovels and see how long of a hole we could dig. 50 feet was about it, so the hardest physical thing I've ever done. But so we made these 3 pieces, so it's just a long canvas string going through the landscape. And then what was more interesting to me was the work that came after it, and we're sort of comparing and contrasting land art with tourist destinations or roadside stops and playing around with sort of this Americana iconography. So, we made signs for each of the pieces. Longest line in the world, for example, of course it was not. And then made postcards of the work, made hats, and playing around with, the souvenirs we take away from these places. And then the last self-portrait is me and my collaborator reenacted as Paul Bunyan statues. So thinking about, the mythology of people in the landscape and what those stories are and how we can sort of try and reshape them a little bit. I also recently made some work about the sun tunnels with this group called Thunderstruck Collective, where I just joined them for this last trip that they visit earthworks on the West Coast. And so after that trip, I made this series of paintings responding to the sun tunnels, and this feels very tied into the reality TV work, thinking about going to those destinations as this sort of theatrical event, one that is photographed widely and sort of trying to recreate a little bit of what it felt like to be there for the solstice. If you don't know the sun tunnels during the solstices, the sun, as it rises and sets, you can see it through 2 of the tunnels at one time. And it's this really interesting experience because it takes you to this small part of Utah, and you do have this sort of intimate relationship with the landscape, but at the actual moment of the sun setting or rising, you couldn't really look at it too much because it's after your eyes, it's blinding. You hear a million cell phone flashes going off, and it's sort of, you can't really see it. So it felt like almost the sun became this celebrity, and it was this like 2-second moment, and then afterwards, everyone's gone. So kind of playing again a series and time-based work of the curtain, linking the landscape to some of the aspects that go with it. So these are just all of those paintings, the curtain opening. And then, oh yes, the show is called Black Hole Sun. So that is from an album, I believe you ever heard it. No. Okay, Peel, help me out. Soundgarden. It's a Soundgarden song. So I'm sure you recognize the song. But Black Hole Sun, there's a sign in the music video where someone has the end is high written on. So I thought it would be funny to sort of play around with that to tag back to some of the religious signs I painted in the past. So I'm teaching And then the last thing I was going to talk about real quick is some of my curatorial work. Curating in my home has been something I've been doing since 2018 with two of my collaborators in LA. So this was our house in LA. We did shows in the garage and outside the house. Then we went to Vegas. This is our house in Vegas. Did a show outside the house, in the garage, in the kitchen, sort of these interventions. This is our new little shed in Reno. We're hoping to do shows there. So if anyone has ideas or wants to come to a show in the shed, let us know. And that's the end, that's the future. So here's where you can see more. Thanks, everyone. Anyone has questions? I have no idea how.
You were perfect. 30 minutes and 50 seconds. Yeah, so let's open it up to some questions and then we can break.
Yes. I'm curious to know how you decide how detailed your paintings are going to be in your project. There's clearly consistency for project, but why you chose to go less detailed in this piece versus your TV pieces?
Yeah, I think the TV, the Bachelor stuff in particular, felt important to be more detailed, mostly because of the closed captioning. I felt like if I painted the text really loose, you would kind of like the specific font that subtitles are in feels really important to me, at least, to like register them as subtitles and not just something that I'm choosing to write. So that was a lot of it, and then I think also just sort of staying true to the contestants' like portraiture. Definitely, though, some of the landscape stuff, I would say it's honestly just like a tendency to think that's like a little looser. The work in this show is super loose, and part of that I think was because I was painting people in water, and kind of the brush strokes of it felt important. I mean, not the most like academic answer, but definitely something that's just intuitive.
Well, I actually sort of follow up. Partially, this is also like I have an artistic student who's painting. But yeah, this idea of like how much you need to actually finish something from image to register. There's so much license that opened up in the 20th century in terms of how a painting is finished, right? It doesn't have to be smoothed over every square inch. And I'm just kind of curious, like how you approach it. I mean, is it sort of an approach of like just enough, or?
Yeah, it's funny that these are the questions. Definitely, Otis and I went to undergrad together, and my number one critique in every painting I ever got was just that it didn't finish. Because I painted much more abundantly. And I really love painting that way, like really trying to find the line of like what is finished.
I think they look finished.
Well, these ones are a million times more finished than those. There was a lot of white space, a lot of like, if I had a portrait and like it and I wiped it away, they're just like, oh, that looks better. Like leaving stuff like that, and I don't know, they've gotten a lot more finished with time, but seeing the work in the show, which is a little older, it's kind of making me yearn to go back to that looser way of painting. So I don't know, that's not really an answer. It's just, I think project by project it's kind of been changing. It's been getting tighter and tighter, especially as I paint TV. And I don't necessarily like that or think I want to keep painting that way. It's honestly less fun for me and less immediate. The paintings where I was painting from TV, there were so many. I did, I think, over 40 of those, and it almost felt a little bit like a factory in them, just trying to paint these people super close to what they look like. I think the landscape stuff tends to be looser because I'm more interested in representing the feeling of the place than getting caught up in someone's portrait. So I don't know if it's good that they're so refined at this point, but I definitely am kind of in between projects right now, and I kind of want to break down some of it. Yes.
I am going to steal a question that one of the professors said to me, which I'm going to ask you. This came from Chris, actually. So I am a painter as well, and he has asked me, what's the point of painting a picture? Like, why did you have to paint the pictures of all the Bachelor people when we already know they're established in a photograph or video or whatever it is. What's the meaning to you that made you have to paint?
I think for me, taking something very fast and like slowing it down and just the act of replicating it by hand kind of gives it power and some like, I don't know how to say like holiness, but you know, if you like love paintings and you believe in painting, then the second something is translated to paint, I think I always pay more attention to it. You know, if I was to show you all the thousands of folders on my computer and the screenshots, I don't think anyone would really care. Maybe if I was a photographer and I like put them in a book format or glue them up there, I'm not saying there's not ways you could translate that work into other genres, but for me, it didn't quite, I don't know, it doesn't quite do the same thing as like replicating paint. There are a few, I'm trying to remember this video of Bachelor, that's just incredible. Definitely there's been times when I'm like, why am I painting this? It seems unnecessary. And I have tried to make sculptures, but I tend to never show them to people because just, I don't know, I don't think they ever feel as finished or as important, or I don't spend as like much time on them to give the same, I don't know, to like honor the subjects in the same way. But also, I just love to paint, so that's like a truer answer. And yeah.
So I'm curious, you look snuck in this curatorial thing at the very end. I'm super interested in one like multi-part question that you can answer just in like one spot. But like one part I'm curious about is how does that intersect with your practice or not? Or how does it continue your practice or not? And then two, I'm interested in how hyper personal those spaces you're curating are, and like the breaking the barrier between like when we make a gallery, we do like a super sterile white space traditionally, and to move it into a domestic space, even if you make your garage a white sterile space, like it's not sterile in the sense of the gallery being sterile. So I'm curious about some of those things.
Yeah, I mean, curatorial stuff impacts my art in a way that it's able for me to meet people most easily, to be honest. And to me, like, without having a community, it's really hard to only talk to Keel about my paintings, and it would be hard for him as well. So I moved to LA right after grad school with my friends, and we started this curatorial project. And I think a lot of it is that we are all very shy. So us hosting events, we were like, you come to us, and that helped us meet people. And I consider it part of my practice in some ways. I don't really consider myself like a social practice artist though. And curating in the home, I mean, honestly, it started because of money constraints. Like we couldn't afford any other places, but I actually really enjoy it and like seeing what happens when you move where work is. And you know, there's been a lot of really amazing artist-run spaces that the people who have written about this kind of mess it up as something suburban. Just sort of what happens when you move into the home. Also, being in Vegas, one of the only places to see art is at the casinos, and I actually loved that. Like, we get the map and sort of like find them and move the slot machines and see, you know, what changes when it's outside of its super clean environment. So I think it's a fun thing for us to do, born of necessity, but continued because it's interesting, and to me, it's just a way to build community and sort of be able to offer some sort of space to people in the only way I can really, other than the digital space, which we have tried to do a little bit the past few years, but it's harder.
And one purchase that Bachelor.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. I made that book. Not at these websites, unfortunately, but Yeah, it's probably linked off my website. It's at National Monument Press, which is, one of my friends in Oakland runs it. If you're in Reno, let me know, I have some copies. But yeah, I think it's linked on my website, mostly from National Monument. So. Oh my gosh, it is, yes.
Could you just say a little bit about the show title?
The show, The Last Resort, is from an Eagles song. It's spelled very corny title of show from an Eagles song. But as I continue to dive into the lyrics, it's actually very applicable. Part of the reason I thought it was interesting because the paintings are from the lagoon, tourist destination, places a lot of money, bringing that work to Tahoe, another tourist destination with a lot of money. So it felt ominous with that. Anyone else? Well, thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you, Kristin. So feel free to take some food on the way out and, or hang around and take another peek at the show. Thank you for coming, everyone.
Thank you, Kristin.
That was really perfect.
Do you have another show in mind that you've been watching?
Oh, to make work.
Yeah. I was gonna ask, but then I like,
My newest thing collecting three of this launching icons.
oh my god.
Cool. I think I'm gonna take a small break from TV. Try and just enjoy it every now and then.
It's
But
pandemic,
pause, watch puppets. Like,
Yeah.
you get to enjoy it. I also haven't had internet for a month like I was telling you, so that's made TV-based work harder.
Yes. I figured we would end that